What if I told you that one woman's charm could alter the course of an empire, that a glance, a whisper, a forbidden promise could split a kingdom from the Church of Rome, and that love, wrapped in ambition and rumor, could burn as fiercely as witchfire? This is the story of Anne Boleyn, the second queen of Henry VIII of England. Her rise was like a comet blazing across the Tudor sky, dazzling, defiant, doomed. For England, in the early 1520s, the air was thick with incense and politics. Candlelight glowed on the stone walls of Greenwich Palace, reflecting in the polished silver of the court. Laughter, music, and intrigue twined together like vines, and in those grand halls walked a girl whose dark eyes seemed to catch more than they revealed. Anne Boleyn had returned from the glittering courts of Burgundy and France, where she'd learned the elegant arts of flirtation, conversation, and survival. She was unlike the English ladies who whispered behind their fans. Anne's speech carried the lilt of foreign courts, her manner, the subtle confidence of one who had seen kings and cardinals bow to queens. At first, she served Queen Catherine of Aragon, wife to King Henry VIII. Catherine, dignified, devout, and aging, had been married to Henry for nearly 20 years. Yet the queen's womb had betrayed her. No surviving sons. Only one child lived, a daughter named Mary. The court buzzed with unspoken truth. Henry wanted a son, and when a king wants something, the world bends or breaks to give it to him. Into that restless silence stepped Anne Boleyn. Too, it was said that Henry first noticed Anne during a masque, a courtly dance filled with laughter and veiled meaning. The king's gaze followed her as she moved, her dark hair gleaming, her French-trained grace flowing like music itself. Unlike her sister, Mary Boleyn, who had once been the king's mistress, Anne refused to yield easily. She was witty, sharp-tongued, and not afraid of silence. When Henry sent her small gifts, jewels, letters, tokens of desire, Anne returned them. When he sought her presence, she vanished into the guarded chambers of the queen, and that refusal, that maddening, magnetic no, became Henry's obsession. In letters still surviving today, he wrote to her, in a trembling mixture of reverence and longing, "I beg to know what is the thing most desired by you, for it shall be done, though it cost me my life." Anne, clever and calculating, understood power. She had watched how women could rise and fall at a man's whim. So she built a different kind of throne, one of mystery. She told Henry that she would not be his mistress, she would be his wife. It was an impossible demand. Henry was still bound to Queen Catherine, and though he had once adored her, now he saw her as a wall between him and destiny. He argued that their marriage had been cursed from the start. Catherine had been his brother's widow, and the Bible, he claimed, forbade such unions. When the Pope refused to grant him an annulment, Henry's desire for Anne twisted into something greater. He began to believe that God himself willed him to cast Catherine aside. Anne encouraged that fire. She whispered of reformers, of Holy Scripture, of kings chosen by God and not bound by Rome. Their secret correspondence became a war disguised as love letters. The court divided. Catherine's loyalists, led by her nephew, the powerful Emperor Charles V, against Anne's supporters, a new faction of ambitious men who saw in her the dawn of change. Behind it all, the rumor mills churned, that Anne had bewitched the king, that she used charms and potions, that she whispered spells at night to keep him from Catherine. The term witch was not yet the fearful condemnation it would become, but in Tudor England it was a blade, sharp and easy to wield. After years of defiance, Henry defied the Pope, broke England from the Catholic Church, and crowned himself supreme head of the Church of England. In secret, he married Anne in 1533, and months later, she was publicly crowned queen at Westminster Abbey. On that summer day, the people cheered, but not all with joy. Many whispered behind their hands, refusing to bow to the concubine. Some muttered that she carried the devil's mark, a sixth finger, a mole, or a shadow in her blood. Anne smiled through it all, radiant and proud. Her crown glittered, but it was heavy. She was 6 months pregnant, and Henry's expectations burned brighter than any candle. If she bore a son, her enemies would be silenced. If she bore a daughter, when the child was born, the heralds announced with forced celebration, "God save Queen Anne and her daughter, Elizabeth." Henry's face, witnesses said, fell like stone. Still, he told himself it was a beginning, not an end. Sons would follow. The prophecy of love and destiny could not be wrong. But beneath the gold and silk, Anne's world was already cracking. Anne was no quiet consort. She argued with Henry, challenged his counselors, and insulted those who once adored Catherine. She was quick to anger, but also quick to laugh. Too much woman for a court that preferred its queens silent and smiling. In her chambers, she gathered poets, reformers, and dreamers. But outside her doors, her enemies gathered too. Among them was Thomas Cromwell, the king's ruthless minister, who had once been her ally. Now, her influence threatened his power. When Anne failed to produce a male heir after multiple miscarriages, one said to have been a boy lost after Henry's fall from his horse, the king's devotion turned to bitterness. He began to believe the whispers he had once ignored. They said Anne had tricked him. They said she had used witchcraft to enchant him into marriage, that her deformities, her rumored extra finger, the small mole on her neck, were marks of the devil, that her miscarried child was a monster, deformed as proof of her sin. The same passion that had lifted her to the throne now became the torch that would burn her name. It began in April 1536. Anne was arrested and charged with adultery, incest, and treason. The accusations were grotesque: that she had seduced her own brother, George Boleyn, that she had taken 5 lovers, that she had plotted the king's death. Anne denied it all. She swore before God that she was innocent. Yet in the echoing halls of the Tower of London, her pleas were meaningless. The men accused with her were swiftly condemned. Some had never even been near her chambers. Cromwell's machinery of guilt spun so efficiently that the outcome was certain before the first word was spoken. At her trial in the great hall of the Tower, Anne stood tall, dressed in grey damask, her dark eyes steady. She faced a jury of noblemen, many of whom owed their loyalty to Cromwell or the king. She spoke with the poise of a queen, declaring, "I do not say I have been so perfect that I have not sinned, but I say I never offended my sovereign lord." Even her enemies marveled at her courage. One witness wrote that her calmness made men's hearts ache, but courage could not save her. On May 15th, 1536, she was found guilty. The sentence, death by burning, or the king's mercy, beheading. Henry chose the latter. A French swordsman was summoned. Anne, ever proud, thanked her husband for his great kindness. Dawn broke cold and pale over the tower. Anne knelt in prayer as the bell tolled. Outside, a small crowd gathered, courtiers, guards, and curious citizens, all drawn by the morbid gravity of history unfolding. She wore a gown of gray damask, her dark hair tucked beneath a white coif. She smiled faintly as she walked to the scaffold. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. I pray God save the king, for he is a good, gentle, and sovereign Lord. He has been ever a good husband to me. It was not love that made her say it. It was survival of the soul. In a world where every woman's words were weighed against obedience, Anne chose grace in the face of injustice. She knelt, whispered a final prayer, and with one swift stroke, the sword fell. The crowd gasped, and silence swept across the tower green. Her body was placed in an arrow chest, too small for a queen, and buried beneath the cold stones of St. Peter ad Vincula. In the days that followed, Henry dressed in white and rode out hunting. By week's end, he was betrothed to Jane Seymour, Anne's former lady-in-waiting. The speed of it all stunned Europe. To some, Anne's death was divine justice. To others, it was proof of tyranny. But time has its own justice. Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, would rise to the throne 22 years later. She would rule for 45 years. The golden age of England. She would restore her mother's honor without ever speaking her name aloud. Under Elizabeth, the same court that had condemned Anne would bow to her child. The same nobles who had whispered of witchcraft would kneel to the Virgin Queen. And in that silent triumph, Anne's ghost seemed to walk again through the halls of Whitehall and Hampton Court, her laughter echoing softly, her spirit unbroken. Centuries later, historians still argue, was Anne guilty of manipulation or merely survival? Did she wield witchcraft or only intelligence sharper than any man's comfort could allow? The truth is both simpler and more tragic. Anne Boleyn was no sorceress. She was a woman of extraordinary wit in an age that punished brilliance in women. She dared to demand equality in a love that could never give it. She challenged a king, and for that, she was destroyed. The accusations of witchcraft were never about spells or potions. They were about fear, the fear of a woman who could not be controlled. The word witch became the weapon that history used to explain what it could not understand. Anne's life reminds us that forbidden love is often not the love itself, but the defiance it represents. She wanted more than affection. She wanted agency, a place in a world that offered women none. In that defiance, she burned brightly, and for that brightness, she was extinguished. Yet her light endures. Every time we speak her name, every time Elizabeth's reign is remembered as England's finest, Anne Boleyn lives again, not as a witch, not as a seductress, but as the mother of a nation and the embodiment of change born through suffering. Visit the Tower of London today, and you might feel her there. The stones remember. The ravens shift uneasily near the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where her bones lie nameless among nobles and traitors alike. Tourists pass, cameras click, but sometimes the air stills. A shadow seems to move across the green, a faint whisper of silk trailing behind. Some say, at dawn, a woman in gray walks toward the scaffold, head held high, lips moving in silent prayer. Anne Boleyn, forever poised between love and legend. The candle burns low, and the halls of history fall silent once more. Anne Boleyn's story is not merely of witchcraft or betrayal. It is a mirror held to the human heart, where love and ambition intertwine, and power demands its price. If this tale has stirred your thoughts, let the embers of curiosity remain. Subscribe that you may walk again through the corridors of the past, where every whisper of silk and every tolling bell still reminds us that even those condemned by kings can outlive them in memory. I am your narrator. This was Anne Boleyn, Witchcraft Rumors and Forbidden Love. Until next time, keep your candles lit and your mind open to the echoes of history.